Hey y'all, so I'm back. I realized I say, hey y'all, I'm back in every video, so I was gonna make an effort to come up with a different intro. Obviously that worked out really well. Off to a strong start. I am on video 3 of my series related to internal governance. Up until this point, we've been talking about meetings, the proper way to call meetings, run meetings, etc. All of those fun technicalities, and all that stuff is really important, but something I want to take a step back from that for a second and talk about something that I think is really fundamentally misunderstood, and that is the role of varying different levels within an entity. And specifically what I want to focus on within that is the differences between a manager or board of directors member and an officer. So as you'll see, I'm standing in front of a whiteboard at the university that I teach at sometimes, and I want to give a little depiction that I think helps to tangibly understand the difference in concepts. So I'll do one example using an LLC and one example using a corporation. They both essentially work the same way in terms of structure. There are different names, they have different scales and technical functions, but they both essentially work the same way. So we'll start with that. Our base layer of both entity types are the members or the shareholders. So in a corporation, that's going to be your stockholders, your shareholders, whatever you refer to them as. In an LLC, that's going to be your members. So this is your biggest group of people. This is the people that have equity ownership in the company. These are your investors, all of the people that have some sort of stake in the company. This is our biggest group. These are the people that are really in control of the fundamental business transactions that need to be advised of the big decisions made in the company, and they get kind of general oversight. Think about it like you would think of the general population in an election. Our next layer is, we start to get into some of that confusion. On the corporate level, this is our board of directors. I'm going to abbreviate it as BOD. So this is our board of directors. And in an LLC, it's either going to be called a board of managers if you have multiple managers, or just the manager if you only have one. So either board of managers or the manager. What is the actual role of a board of directors or a board of managers or a manager? They're the individuals that are really in charge of the day-to-day operations, direction, and control of the company. These are the people that are tasked with ensuring that the ship stays afloat and on course in its day-to-day journey. Everyone is involved on that ship of getting from point A to point B, right? The stakeholders, the stockholders, and the members are all on the ship, but the board of directors and the board of managers are really in charge of making sure that that ship stays on course and gets to where the passengers want it to go. So we have our board of managers and our board of directors at the very top, and I try not to think of this as much of a hierarchy as I think of it as just a differentiation of different classes. So try not to think of people at the top as being authoritatively at the top. Just think of them more as separate from the classes in these other boxes. So then we have our officers in both instances. Some LLCs don't actually use officers. Some of them just have their managers function in all of the officer capacities. Assuming that you do have officers for your LLC, this is where they would fall. Why is understanding these differentiations important? Well, in both of these entities, it's this biggest group at the bottom, generally, that is electing these middle people. The board of directors and board of managers are, to some extent, elected by your stockholders or your members. So that's what I mean when I say your stockholders, shareholders, and members have final say and oversight on everything. Just like the American people have final say over the legislative delegates that we represent to the various houses or chambers of Congress. Your stockholders and members have final oversight over your board of directors or manager positions. That may not always be the case in that some roles or positions on a board of directors or a board of managers may be reserved for specific classes of voting, so maybe not all of these stockholders have a right to vote on every board seat. Same way in the LLC, that just kind of varies, but these positions are elected by the more general category of shareholders, stockholders, or members. So our board of directors are the ones, or our managers, are the ones that are in charge of the day-to-day operations. But just as, and I use this example with my classes all the time, and I think it works, so I hope y'all find this helpful. But just as these board of directors and managers cannot, a lot of times, be personally involved in every single decision that a company is making, a corporation or an LLC is making, they have to delegate some of that power to these officer positions to ensure that everything's getting done. So our officers are appointed by our board of directors or by our members. What is their job? Their job is to take minute functionalities and rights and powers that have been reserved to the board of directors or to the managers and enact them and ensure that those functionalities are working for the purpose of the company on a daily basis. So just like Congress doesn't have the time, capacity, bandwidth to be able to handle the minute technicalities of environmental regulation on a day-to-day basis, they have assigned and delegated that specific power that they possess to the EPA. Officers work the same way, right? The board of directors or our managers have our general operational control, but maybe they say, okay, we're going to hire a chief technology officer that is responsible for the technology oversight, research and development, etc., of the operations of the company. That CTO ultimately reports to the board of directors, just the EPA reports to Congress, but they cannot step outside of the scope of those powers. Why do I incorporate all of this now as we've been talking about meetings? Well, because in a properly structured and functioning entity, all of those officer positions need to be specified in some sort of documentation in terms of job description, salary, scope of authority, all of that stuff. Why is that important? Because if I, as the CTO, have not been provided a clearly defined and narrowed scope of what my job responsibilities are, then there could be an argument made that your authority really relates back to the board of directors. So whatever board of directors powers exist, you also have as an officer. In those specifically tailored job functions, we give those officers their scope of power. So just like the EPA could not suddenly decide that they're going to start regulating securities exchanges, a chief technology officer with a properly defined scope of power could not suddenly decide that they want to undertake or write a massive check for a marketing campaign or an advertising campaign without oversight from the COO or the COO or the CMO or whatever the situation may be, whatever officer has control over marketing and management or marketing and advertising. Why is this important in the grand scheme of things? It provides you protection as an entire entity. So at the base level, provide your shareholders, members, and stockholders protection that they have control and properly delineated authority between the officers. But it also provides your board of directors protection in terms of liability, because if one of these officers goes rogue and does something that isn't in the best interest of the company or is outside of the scope of what you appointed them to do, you want to be able to point back to some documentation that says, hey man, CTO, you are only allowed to do things related to technology and development of technology and procuring it, etc., and you went over here and invested $500,000 in real estate. That is outside of the scope of your job. We want to be able to take that back, claw that back, collect those damages from you, something along those lines. I hope, like I said, this is a general, really broad overview, but I hope that it's been helpful. As always, if you have questions, feel free to leave them down below, and I will see y'all again for the next video.